Maybe someone saw me killing, raping, dragging out the corpse, burning it? No. There, your whole life is familiar, it's all limited. They start by taking away your face.
On August 24, 2013, men and women are walking through the forest near the village of Reshoti, which is 25 kilometers from Yekaterinburg, Russia. The weather is warm, there's no wind, so the mushroom pickers first notice the smoke, and only then do they start to smell it. A thin wisp of smoke rises from a fire pit not far from the edge of the forest. Someone didn't put out their campfire again, the couple sighs. They'll have to do it themselves. The man and woman approach the fire and almost immediately freeze, unable to believe their eyes. In the fire pit, lying face down, is the naked corpse of a woman. The smoke carries the smell of burnt flesh to the couple, and the woman starts to feel sick. The police who arrive take the charred body to Yekaterinburg to the medical examiner's bureau. Just a week later, she is identified as 28-year-old Yulia Prokopeva, the wife of the well-known photographer Dmitry Loshagin. And a year and a half later, Loshagin himself will be sent to a penal colony for taking his wife's life despite the lack of direct evidence in the case.
In your opinion, why did you end up behind bars? Why are you here? What is the reason? I still don't understand why this nonsense is happening in my life, but you keep fighting as far as I know. Yes, we are currently at the cassation stage.
This case still remains one of the most controversial and mysterious in criminal history, if not of Russia, then at least of the Urals. Today's episode is very thorough, and there's a reason I'm recording this phrase with an especially nasal, congested voice. Because today, you'll have the chance to draw your own conclusion based on all the versions and form your own opinion, which you can then write in the comments. But don't read the comments until you've watched the video. Also, in the video, I'll sometimes mix up the last names Prokopchik and Prokopchuk, and that's terrible. Dmitry Loshagin was born in Yekaterinburg in 1978. He grew up in a well-off family and was a beloved child. At school, Dmitry was involved in photography and achieved his first significant success at the age of 16. His first photo exhibition was organized in Crimea. After finishing school, Loshagin entered the Faculty of Economics at the Ural State Technical University.
After receiving his degree in economics, nevertheless, he continued to develop his photo studio.
He didn't give up photography. On the contrary, he got a job at the well-known local modeling agency Alexandri. There he worked as the chief photographer, commercial director, and art manager. At the same time, Loshagin participated in various competitions and received prizes more than once. After university, Loshagin decided that he would go into business. He opened his own photo studio, which quickly became well known in Russia and abroad. For many years, he was officially the photographer for the Miss Yekaterinburg contest. In 2004, Loshagin met his future first wife, model Tatiana Grigorieva. At that time, the girl was 17. The couple got married in 2006. Tatiana later gave birth to a son, Danil, but in 2010 they divorced. Nevertheless, the former spouses maintained a business relationship, and Tatiana later took part in many of Loshagin's projects. A short time after the divorce, Loshagin started dating Yulia Prokopeva, a 26-year-old model from Nizhny Tagil. He met Yulia 10 years ago when she was only 16. Back then, dreaming of becoming a model, she decided to take part in the Miss Nizhny Tagil beauty contest. Dmitry really liked the girl and he offered to make her a portfolio for free. Their relationship didn't turn into anything more back then, but Yulia remembered that meeting. Their relationship developed quite quickly. Loshagin suggested the girl do a photo shoot in India and then he proposed to her. They got married in Prague. The ceremony was beautiful and romantic. After the wedding, Yulia kept her last name, Prokopieva. Soon after the wedding, Loshagin bought a 2-story loft in Yekaterinburg where the couple moved. Loshagin set up his studio in the loft and called it Loshagin Loft Art Space. There, he regularly gathered the elite and representatives of the bohemian scene, artists, photographers, and designers. Loshagin's social parties were known for their scale. Yulia and Dmitry gladly welcomed guests. Around this time, Loshagin began having conflicts with his ex-wife Tatiana. The woman claimed that Loshagin stopped paying child support and didn't see his son at all, saying that the child wasn't his and therefore he wasn't obligated to provide any financial support. Yulia also contributed to the cooling of their relationship. She was jealous of her husband because of Tatiana and didn't want them to work together. Tatiana was forced to leave Dmitry's agency and got a job as a manager at the Hyatt Hotel bar. From the outside, it seemed that the Loshagin couple lived in perfect harmony and were madly in love with each other. They were always holding hands, called each other Amor, and talked about how happy they were. In one interview, Dmitry said that his biggest dream was to become a grandfather, to go say goodbye to the beach, and to hold Yulia's hand for his whole life. But the beautiful fairy tale didn't last long. It all ended in tragedy. On August 31, 2013, the police in Yekaterinburg received a statement from Mikhail Ryabov, who lived in Nizhny Tagil and was Yulia Prokopeva's brother. He said that his sister hadn't been in touch for over a week and her husband Dmitry was acting strangely. The very next day, Yulia's relatives were invited to identify the body of a woman whose corpse had been found on August 24, 50 meters from the Staromoskovsky tract in the forest near the village of Rashoti. The oddities had already begun by then. Only Yulia's mother, Svetlana Ryabova, and her brother came to identify the body. Dmitry Loshagin refused to go to the morgue. When Svetlana arrived at the morgue, she was warned to prepare herself. The body she was about to see had been in a fire. There was almost no hair or skin left on the left side. The face was burned down to the bone. Svetlana felt her legs give way beneath her. Summoning her courage, she entered the identification room and, approaching the table, looked at the corpse. The body lying on the table really did look terrible, but the woman didn't scream out of fear. Unfortunately, due to YouTube's censorship, I can't show some documentary materials, so I'll post them on the Strashnodi Telegram channel. Go ahead, subscribe and watch. The link is below the video. On the fingernails of the right hand, which was almost untouched by burns, Yulia's mother noticed traces of nail polish, the same kind as her daughter's. She saw her for the last time. The corpse on the table really could have belonged to Yulia Prokopeva. Death occurred as a result of a broken neck vertebrae, the experts reported. When the body was burned, the victim was already dead. But this didn't make it any easier for Svetlana. She could barely stand on her feet. The woman was asked to provide a DNA sample to the laboratory in order to finally establish the identity of the deceased. She needed to have the analysis done. There was still a possibility that the body was not Yulia's. There was still a chance that the color of the nail polish was just a coincidence. But the tests confirmed it. The burned body was Yulia Prokopeva. A mistake was ruled out. The investigators immediately went to Loshagin's place of residence. Dmitry, who met them, seemed shocked by the news of his wife's death, but he behaved quite calmly. He did not resist when he was asked to come to the station, and he gave his testimony methodically, carefully choosing his words. Loshagin stated that he had nothing to do with his wife's disappearance or her death. According to him, on the night of August 22nd into the 23rd, there was a party at his house with more than 10 guests. Yulia was at the party with him, and when the guests left, she left the apartment without explanation and went off to who knows where. She had done this before. Sometimes she would just run off into the night, drive around the city, wander somewhere, and then come back home as if nothing had happened. That's exactly why he wasn't alarmed when she disappeared. That's also why he didn't go to the police. He was sure his wife would come back. Yulia had this character trait. She was very impulsive, easily swayed by emotions, and reacted strongly to everything, said Loshagin. Sometimes she would even fly abroad, and then I would call her and ask where she was, and she would say, "I'm in Istanbul, I'll be back soon." However, the investigators did not believe his explanation. In addition, Yulia's relatives all said in unison that she didn't have that kind of character, and that the couple always traveled together. And after the interrogation, Dmitry Loshagin became the main suspect. His behavior during those days was indeed extremely suspicious. On September 2nd, Loshagin posted an ad to sell his studio apartment, which he valued at 50 million rubles. Of course, by studio apartment it doesn't mean a regular one-room apartment with a combined kitchen, but rather an apartment plus Loshagin's working studio loft. On the same day, he left the apartment and disappeared to an unknown location. And he was declared wanted. On September 3, 2013, Dmitry Loshagin was detained in Pervuralsk. During the search, officers seized plane tickets to Moscow and Simferopol from him. Loshagin stated that he wasn't planning to fly anywhere. He said he went to Pervuralsk simply on business. However, he again did not resist during the arrest. Repeated interrogations began, and almost immediately Loshagin started contradicting himself in his statements. At first, he stated that on August 23, Yulia left the house and went off in an unknown direction, taking her passport and handbag with her. He supposedly assumed at the time that his wife had gone to visit one of her friends. However, when Loshagin's apartment was searched, the passport was found to be in place. In addition, Yulia's iPhone, which she used for business negotiations, was also found in the apartment. The woman's relatives and acquaintances all said in unison that she would never go on a trip without her phone. Then Loshagin stated that Yulia left home in his car on the night of August 23rd, but the car was found in the parking lot near their house. After learning about this, Loshagin stated that he had taken the car to the parking lot himself, and that the car mysteriously appeared outside his windows on August 24th during the day. "Why didn't you call the police?" was the next question. "After all, someone drove the car your wife was using right under your own windows." Loshagin found it difficult to answer. After that, he refused. He also refused to answer any further questions. He also refused to take a polygraph test, once again stating that he was not guilty of anything. The guests at the party mentioned by Loshagin, who were interviewed during the investigation, were unable to provide any additional information. Yulia was indeed present at the event. She seemed happy and cheerful. She didn't appear to have any arguments with Loshagin. However, no one could remember where she went after 11 p.m., but that alone didn't mean anything. The investigators hit a dead end. There was no direct evidence of Loshagin's guilt in causing his wife's death. Besides, the motives were not clear. Yulia's brother and some of her friends claimed that the Loshagin family was going through a crisis, and that Yulia was ready to get a divorce. According to them, Loshagin was too fond of the bohemian lifestyle. He constantly needed inspiration and passion. He got a mistress, and his wife found out about it. Yulia was a proud woman, and she didn't stay silent. The quarrels began. Loshagin became aggressive. He could raise his hand against Yulia, grab her by the arms during the arguments. However, some of Loshagin's friends claimed that it was actually Yulia who was caught being unfaithful in the marriage. Moreover, the deceased was recently found to have HIV. Loshagin was furious. That's exactly why the argument started.
We argue very passionately, but we get over it very quickly. Literally 3 or 4 minutes later and we're already making up and kissing. Making up even more.
Yes, but it can be very intense. Tell me, how intense? Well, if Dima really doesn't like something, he might snatch away a glass of wine.
I think
Something is already happening. I say, Amura, do you understand what you're doing? Yes, I'm already making up.
the theory leaked to the press, but then this information was not confirmed. Tatiana Grigorieva, Loshagin's ex-wife, told the investigators that she saw Yulia on the night of August 23rd at the Pushkin nightclub. She wasn't alone, she was with a group of several men. I don't know any of them, Grigorieva said. But this information also turned out to be unreliable. According to the cell phone location records of Loshagin, it was established that on August 23 he was in the area where his wife's body was found. In the end, it was this circumstance that became decisive. Dmitry Loshagin was nevertheless charged under Part 1 of Article 105 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation for taking a life. By that time, he had completely refused to cooperate with the investigation and kept repeating that he was not guilty of anything. The case was high profile. Dmitry Loshagin was a figure known far beyond Yekaterinburg. The first department for the investigation of especially important cases of the Investigative Committee of the Russian Federation for the Sverdlovsk region took over the investigation. Federal and local channels aired several reports on the case. In September 2013, Loshagin's lawyers filed a motion with the court to change the preventive measure from arrest to a written undertaking not to leave the area. In the motion, the lawyers drew attention to circumstances that the prosecution had previously omitted and which, in their opinion, indicated that Loshagin was not guilty of his wife's death. Thus, Loshagin did indeed have tickets to Simferopol in his pocket, but there were also return tickets for September 9, 2013. This meant that Loshagin was planning to return. He wasn't planning to flee. In addition, the cell phone location data was also questionable. At the moment the body was discovered, Yuliya Loshagin was at the Palace of Sports, but just 11 seconds later he appeared on Svilinga Street, which is about 3 kilometers from that location. Well, although now anyone, at least in Russia, knows how that works, it's just that your navigator, once it stops picking up the signal, the GPS turns off, and suddenly you're not in the city center but in the middle of a river. Maybe there was something like that there. The lawyers also criticized the statement made by the investigation. The point is that Loshagin, such movement over 3 kilometers in 15 seconds is impossible, which means the billing data was wrong and can't be trusted. The lawyers also criticized the statement made by the investigation that Loshagin announced the sale of his apartment the day after it was established that Yulia had been killed. According to the documents provided by the defense, the apartment was put up for sale as early as August 16th, that is, before Yulia's death. Loshagin earned a decent income, was a well-known and respected person, and was described positively by colleagues and friends. He was madly in love with his wife and treated her like a queen. He simply wasn't capable of raising a hand against her. However, in this case, Loshagin's defenders kept silent about certain circumstances. Shortly before Yulia's death, he was involved in a criminal case initiated under Article 116 of the Russian Criminal Code, battery. The statement was written by his ex-wife, Tatiana Grigorieva. The parties parted amicably at that time, reaching a settlement, but the court took this circumstance into account. Loshagin is capable of attacking a woman. There is cruelty in him. The pre-trial restraint measure was left unchanged. The official investigation was completed on July 10, 2014, and the case was handed over to the court. According to the investigation, the case was as follows. On August 22, 2013, Dmitry Loshagin held a party in his apartment in honor of the artist Yekaterina Ichkinskaya. A group well known to the couple gathered, popular personalities of Yekaterinburg, the elite. 3 days before that, Yulia Prokopeva had turned 28. At the party, Dmitry presented his wife with a luxurious bouquet and gave a beautiful congratulatory speech. The guests applauded. Yulia smiled. Everyone seemed to be happy. Around 10 p.m., Loshagin invited his wife and the guests to the rooftop to admire the nighttime cityscape. They went up through the utility room on the 17th floor where they stayed for some time. Both the guests and the Loshagin couple were drunk. Loshagin was taking photos. After some time, Dmitry and Yulia, along with several guests, returned to the loft, while the rest of the guests stayed on the roof. At 10:45 p.m., when they wanted to return inside, the guests discovered that the door leading to the loft was locked. It is presumed that Loshagin locked it. By that time, he and Yulia were left alone in the loft and for some reason went into the utility room. One thing led to another, and an argument broke out between the spouses. Perhaps jealousy was the reason. One of the witnesses would later say that Yulia didn't like that Loshagin gave Ekaterina Ichkinskaya the same bouquet as he gave his wife. But overall, the reason for the argument remains unknown. Whatever the case, the drunken argument quickly turned into a fight. Loshagin snapped. Pushing his wife against the wall, he kicked Yulia several times in the legs with his shoes on, then grabbed her by the neck. With a jerk, Yulia's neck cracked as a vertebra broke. The woman went limp in her husband's arms and fell to the floor already dead. The whole crime took about 10 minutes. Loshagin locked Yulia's body in the room, then returned to the remaining guests. By that time, the people locked on the roof had already started calling friends who had gone down to the loft with the Loshagins. Neither Yulia's phone nor Dmitry's phone was answering. The key to the service exit was eventually found with the building administrator. The guests went home, the cleaners collected the trash, and Loshagin was left alone with his wife's corpse. Realizing that he needed to get rid of the body as soon as possible, he began undressing it. Soon, Loshagin brought a large transparent plastic container from somewhere. After placing Yulia's body in it, he carried the container out of the apartment and put it in the trunk of his car. It was already morning outside. After driving onto the Staromoskovsky highway, Loshagin headed toward the village of Reshoti, where he stopped at the edge of the forest. He lit a fire and placed his wife's naked body in the flames. After making sure it was burning, Loshagin left the forest and went home. He threw Yulia's clothes into a nearby river. He smashed Yulia's phone. After hearing the investigator's version, Loshagin once again stated that he was not guilty of anything. We were making plans for our future together. We wanted to move to Prague and have children, he claimed. We were happy. However, Svetlana Ryabova, Yulia's mother, knew that her daughter was not happy in her marriage. He constantly controlled her, listened in on her phone calls. He began hitting her in 2012. What plans, when my daughter was going to file for divorce and wanted to transfer the property to me? He had an affair with Miss Yekaterinburg. His decision was firm. The case against Loshagin was still based only on circumstantial evidence, and the defense took advantage of this. So, according to the investigation, Loshagin, after taking his wife's life, carried her body out of the house in a polymer container. The defense, however, claimed that this was simply impossible. There were people in the loft at that time. It would have been impossible for Loshagin to quarrel with his wife without anyone hearing it, let alone beat her. In addition, there were 8 video cameras in the apartment and studio, and one of them actually recorded the moment when Loshagin brought a container into the apartment. However, the size of the container was too small for a body to fit in it easily. To fit Yulia Kompak's body into the container, Loshagin would have had to put the body in a fetal position. Because of rigor mortis, Prokopeva's body should have also been in a fetal position after being dumped from the burning, but in the forest, the body was found in a different position. Moreover, after watching the video, it turned out that Loshagin did not take the container out of the apartment. In response to this, the forensic experts who studied the camera footage stated that part of the recordings from the cameras had been erased. In addition, the prosecution presented the court with footage from the building's entrance camera. It shows Loshagin carrying a large semi-transparent plastic container out of the house with some object at the bottom. Then the defense reminded the court that at the beginning of 2013, Loshagin broke both his ankles while vacationing at a ski resort, and it would have been extremely difficult for him to carry Yulia's body, who weighed 55 kilograms, out of the house by himself. Maybe he isn't the perpetrator after all. One of the guests, or for example the catering staff, could have taken Yulia's life. After the party ended, 6 large boxes were carried out of the loft by 6 movers. They were only able to identify 4 of the men, and they definitely could not have been involved in Yulia's death. But 2 of them still remain unidentified. The accusation was standing on shaky ground. The perpetrator broke the victim's cervical vertebrae, which meant there was no blood evidence and no murder weapon. There were no witnesses to the crime either, nor were there any witnesses to Loshagin's argument. The cell phone records could also be called into question. There wasn't even a clear motive for the crime. All that remained was Loshagin's suspicious behavior and circumstantial evidence, but even those didn't help much. For example, during a second search of the apartment, fragments of a broken wide-bowled glass were found. The prosecution claimed that the glass was broken by the couple during an argument. However, the defense presented the court with photographs showing Yulia and Dmitry drinking from narrow-necked glasses. In addition, forensic experts determined that the fingerprints on the fragments did not belong to Loshagin. A black fragment was found in the apartment. The investigation claimed that it was a piece of the shirt Loshagin was wearing that day. Traces of sweat and skin oils were found on the fabric, but the examination revealed that they did not belong to either Loshagin or Yulia. As it turned out later, the fabric could have been a fragment of a dress or even a pillowcase. One of the witnesses in the case was someone named Vyacheslav Kolipin, in some sources Kolipin with an A in the first syllable, a businessman. Some of Yulia's friends and acquaintances claimed that she had an affair with him and that Loshagin found out about this relationship, which could have been the motive for the crime. Kolipin very reluctantly admitted that he was indeed acquainted with Yulia and that they even went jogging together in the park, but said that they never had any intimate relationship. Although forensic examination established that the last call from the victim's phone was made to Kolipin, the businessman did not answer it. The prosecution demanded that Dmitry Loshagin be found guilty and sentenced to 13 years in prison. By November 2014, the court was already supposed to deliver the verdict. However, the defense unexpectedly filed a motion for a second independent forensic examination to determine the cause and time of death of Yulia Prokopeva. The specialist invited to conduct the examination questioned the conclusion of the previous expert. According to him, the expert from Pervoralsk, Anna Chuloshnikova, did not determine how long the body had been in the forest, did not examine the livor mortis, and did not measure the flow of the remains. She did not indicate in the report the position of the neck muscles, the tongue, the 5 bruises on the inner thigh, and did not mention the fact that food remains were found in the stomach. Chuloshnikova also wrote that charred fragments of clothing remained on the body, while police reports stated that the body was naked. In addition, it turned out that the expert did not dissect Yulia's kidneys, although she stated in the report that such an examination had been conducted. The new report stated that the left side of Yulia's body was burned, including the skin and muscle tissue. While the right side of the body was almost unaffected by the fire, this means that the time of death could have been determined by the temperature of the internal organs. The report stated that the girl's death occurred 6 to 8 hours before she was found in the forest, which means on August 24th, not the 22nd. In addition, the expert also stated that in order to break his wife's neck with his bare hands, Loshagin would have had to possess great physical strength. According to the expert, the accused could not have inflicted such injuries on Yulia. The expert examination completely undermined the prosecution. At the final court session on December 25, 2014, Dmitry Loshagin was found not guilty and released. The verdict caused a storm of outrage among the relatives. Yulia, the girl's mother, stated that she would file an appeal. We had 2 more prosecution witnesses, but for some reason they were not called to court, the woman said, adding that Loshagin did admit to 2 officers during one of the interrogations that he took his wife's life and got rid of Yulia. The woman did not name the officers at that time, but promised to bring them to court. After his release, Loshagin visited his wife's grave in Nizhny Tagil, willingly spoke with the media and gave an interview. When talking to journalists, he maintained that Yulia went to a nightclub with her friend Layla that night, August 23. He claimed that Yulia was seen at the club and even stated that someone saw her in the following days. Loshagin claimed that Yulia died on August 24, that is, 2 days after that party. He fully supported the outside expert's version. So, he reluctantly admitted that he was indeed near the place where the body was found on August 23, but said that there is a campsite there where Yulia sometimes liked to spend time. I thought she might have gone there, so I went there myself, he said. While Loshagin was enjoying his newfound freedom, Yulia's mother, Svetlana Ryabova, decided to take action. She signed a contract with the Moscow lawyer Yevgeny Chernusov, and already in January 2015 they filed an appeal against Loshagin's acquittal. In the appeal, Chernusov pointed out numerous contradictions and violations committed by the invited expert when preparing the report. The expert did not refer to scientifically based methods of the Ministry of Health, but drew conclusions based almost solely on his own experience and opinion. The court had no right to base an acquittal on evidence obtained from a private specialist. At the court hearing, the court heard testimony from 20 witnesses who had attended the party. They stated that they did not notice any quarrels between Yulia and Dmitry on the evening of August 22, 2013. However, noted Chernusov, this does not mean that Loshagin was not involved in his wife's death. The quarrel happened without witnesses. It was not possible to refer to their testimonies when delivering an acquittal verdict. Chernusov also commented on the evidence collected by the investigation. He noted that as a result, during the search of Loshagin's apartment, the Russian and foreign passports of Prokopeva were found, as well as the keys to 2 cars she used to drive and one of her mobile phones. Without these items, Yulia would hardly have left home. The presence of these items at home, according to the instructions of the Prosecutor General's Office of the Russian Federation on handling cases of missing persons, indicates that a deliberate crime was committed against Yulia. At the end of January, a new witness appeared in the case, Operative Pavel Prokopchik. He claimed that at the moment Yulia's body was discovered, her arms and legs were unnaturally bent. This could have confirmed the theory that Loshagin took his wife's body out of the house in a container. Prokopchik also stated that during one of the interrogations, Loshagin confessed to him that he had a fight with Yulia that night and pushed her, causing her to fall and break. To be continued. Pavel Prokopchik's report about Loshagin's confession was addressed to the head of the Criminal Investigation Department of the Main Directorate of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the Sverdlovsk region, Alexander Mazayev, and it was included in the criminal case materials. According to it, Dmitry Loshagin confessed that he transported Yulia's body in a container to the area near the village of Reshoti, where he threw his wife's belongings into a local river and scattered his own belongings in nearby dumps. Despite the existence of the report, neither the investigation nor the court took testimony from Prokopchuk at that time, citing the fact that he was an interested party. And yet this testimony could have changed everything. In addition, Chernusov also wrote a letter addressed to State Duma Deputy Roman Kudyakov, in which he asked to involve employees of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the Investigative Committee from Moscow in the investigation. In early February, Loshagin posted on his VKontakte page a conversation with Prokopchuk, who allegedly demanded $50,000 from him in exchange for refusing to testify against him. Prokopchuk did not confirm the authenticity of this conversation, but it did cause a stir. Information appeared in several media outlets and on the internet that an active law enforcement officer was engaged in extortion. In response, the press secretary of the main directorate of the Ministry of Internal Affairs for the Sverdlovsk region, Valery Gorelik, stated that this could be grounds for filing a lawsuit against Loshagin to protect Prokopchuk's business reputation. The court hearing to appeal the verdict took place on February 26 and lasted almost 5 hours. As a result, the acquittal of Dmitry Loshagin was overturned and the case was sent back for further proceedings. As a preventive measure, Loshagin was placed under a travel ban. In its decision, the Sverdlovsk Regional Court relied on overlooked facts, incorrect assessments, and numerous violations of the Criminal Procedure Code committed by the investigation and the court of first instance. For example, surveillance camera footage from the night of August 22 to 23, 2013 showed that Yulia entered the photo studio. After that, guests and catering staff also entered the premises, but none of them saw Yulia. The trial court also did not pay attention to the fact that at some point, some of the guests ended up locked on the loft's roof, and the Loshagins suddenly both picked up their phones at the same time, after which both of Yulia's phones were turned off. Moreover, it turned out that the experts managed to recover a video recording from Loshagin's apartment made early in the morning on August 23. In it, you can see how, in the dark near the glass doors, a person with a flashlight in his hand is dragging some object across the floor from the direction of the utility room. Loshagin claimed that he was in the apartment on the morning of August 23. That means the person could only have been him. Loshagin himself, realizing that this time everything was definitely not in his favor, defended himself desperately. More than once he tried to accuse Svetlana Ryabova of simply making up her testimony. He even brought in Yulia's school diploma, claiming that Svetlana had bought it. The court ruled the diploma issue was irrelevant to the case. Loshagin's lawyers, however, were not idle either. They called a new defense witness to court, Yulia's agent, Alex Vernik. Vernik stated that the relationship between the Loshagins was good and that he knew nothing about any aggression from Dmitry. He stated that the modeling business is incompatible with domestic violence. Brands like Dolce and Gabbana and Prada impose penalties for bruises and tattoos on models. We always check the models before a shoot. If there is a bruise, we simply do not allow that model to work. Vernik, however, noted that Yulia herself was quite quarrelsome, demanding, and had a tense relationship with Tatiana, Loshagin's ex-wife. Once, she even poured a glass of champagne over Tatiana's head at one of the Hyatt parties. The court was gradually descending into chaos. The defense brought in new experts, and they stated that Yulia Prokopeva's neck had been attempted to be broken at least 4 times, and that the crime itself occurred at around 7 or 8 a.m. on August 24, 2013. And this contradicted the official version of the prosecution. There was also information that shortly before her death, Yulia had been assaulted anally with a blunt object. On April 15, Tatiana Grigorieva herself appeared in court. Now the woman was no longer defending her ex-husband. Tatiana stated that back at the first trial, Loshagin confessed to her that he accidentally took Yulia's life when he pushed her during an argument and she fell. He took the body to the forest. He didn't call the police because there were illegal substances in the loft. Grigorieva also stated that Loshagin often complained to her about Yulia's behavior. The woman really wanted a divorce, but Loshagin was against it. And then she started blackmailing him by threatening to file a report with the police because there were illegal items in the apartment. On May 23, 2013, on the broadcast of the TV program What Was That?, Dmitry Loshagin stated that he became a victim of political expediency and that the guilty verdict against him had already been delivered in absentia by the head of the investigative committee of Russia, Alexander Bastrykin, the chairman of the court, Alexander Dementiev, and the chief of Sverdlovsk police, Mikhail Borodin. The statement caused a wide public response, but as expected, Loshagin was unable to substantiate his claims in any way. On June 8, 2015, the final court hearing took place. At it, Dmitry Loshagin gave his final statement. In particular, he said the following: "I ask everyone, why would I throw all this away? For what purpose? Jealousy? That's unproven and at the very least foolish. Money? I have no financial gain from my wife's death because I'm just a psycho and an idiot. For some reason, over the many years, people who know me never noticed that. Just like that. Even if we didn't love each other, then why didn't I lay a hand on my 3 previous wives? You ask why I refused to take a polygraph test? I'll tell you, I don't trust you." And before moving on to the verdict and what happened next, I'll try to figure out what kind of person Dmitry Loshagin is. And he is apparently a complex and contradictory figure, combining the traits of a charismatic creator and a cold manipulator. His personality can be described as narcissistic with pronounced traits of antisocial disorder. He knew how to make an impression as a successful, charming person, surrounded by admirers and the creative elite, but behind this facade was a tendency toward control, aggression, and pathological lying. The psychological profile of Loshagin is based on several key traits. First of all, it's extreme narcissism. He saw himself as the center of the universe. He demanded admiration and reacted painfully to any criticism or threat to his status. His public statements about loving his wife and dreaming of family happiness contrast with his real behavior, jealousy, aggression, and a desire to completely dominate his partner. Secondly, he clearly had a tendency toward manipulation. He skillfully played roles, adapting to situations. At one moment, he was the victim of an unjust trial, then a repentant husband, then an innocent creator who was wrongly convicted. Another important trait is emotional coldness. Even in the most dramatic moments, identifying bodies, arrest, trial, he showed not a natural reaction of grief or fear, but a calculated restraint. His lies were calculated but at the same time chaotic. He easily changed his testimony when the old versions fell apart, but he felt no guilt. This is typical for people with psychopathic tendencies who lack an internal moral barrier. His behavior after conviction is interesting. Instead of remorse, he continued to deny his guilt, accusing the authorities and judges of fabricating the case. At the same time, he managed to adapt to the prison system using his manipulation skills. For example, by participating in exposing corruption among the prison guards, which speaks to his high intelligence and ability to find benefit even in extremely unfavorable conditions. Overall, Loshagin is a typical example of a successful psychopath, charming, intelligent but lacking empathy, and capable of cruelty when his interests are threatened. His story is an example of how narcissism and antisocial traits can hide behind the mask of a creative and socialite persona. Could he have been his wife's executioner? Well, considering the psychological profile, yes, Loshagin could have taken a person's life. His narcissistic and psychopathic traits, pathological lying, lack of empathy, need for control, and tendency toward aggression created a dangerous combination. 1. Motive: narcissists cannot tolerate losing control over their people. If Yulia was really planning to leave, as her loved ones claimed, this could have provoked his rage. An alternative motive is jealousy over either his infidelity or hers, which also fits the pattern of narcissistic injury. 2. Method. Breaking someone's neck is an impulsive but clean method. There's no blood, no need for a weapon. It could have been a spontaneous act of rage, for example during an argument, rather than a premeditated killing. His athletic background and physical condition made this possible. 3. Behavior afterwards. His lies about his wife's whereabouts, his attempt to hide, and the destruction of Yulia's phone are typical actions of guilty people trying to cover their tracks. Psychopaths are often confident that they can outsmart the system. That's why his excuses aren't chaotic but rather brazen, like the one about the mystical return of the car. 4th, the lack of remorse. Even in prison he didn't admit guilt, but that's not innocence, it's narcissistic defense. For such people, admitting guilt is the collapse of their ideal self. However, there's an important nuance. Psychological predisposition does not equal proven guilt. It's possible he didn't take his wife's life, but his behavior and personality made him the perfect suspect. So psychologically, yes, he was capable. The legal question remains debatable due to a lack of direct evidence. His guilt is very likely, but not certain. On June 24, 2015, a guilty verdict was delivered against Dmitry Loshagin. The court sentenced him to 10 years in a high-security penal colony. Loshagin appealed the verdict, and his prison term was reduced by 2 months. He was sent to serve his sentence in the Novaya Lyalya colony. While in custody, Loshagin became a suspect in December 2015 in another attempted murder, this time of prosecutor Mikhail Azdoev, who insisted on his guilt. The incident occurred late at night on May 30, 2015, shortly before the guilty verdict was delivered. The perpetrator set a car tire on fire in front of Azdoev's front door, smoke from the tire. It filled the living space. If Azdoev had been home, he would have suffocated. The prosecutor then visited the sites and attended meetings solely with security. Then Loshagin did undergo a polygraph test, but the results were inconclusive. He was not held accountable in this case. In the colony, Loshagin often worked as a photographer, creating reports about events. He even wanted to donate his photography equipment to the colony, but they did not accept it. At the same time, he continued to claim that he was sent to prison for political reasons. I know for sure that the judge who tried me was made the head of the court after my trial, he told journalists in 2016. When the prosecutor, leaving the courtroom, asks the judge if he did everything right and people heard it, what do you call that? In 2018, Rafik Zinatulin, the deputy head of the prison where Loshagin was held, was arrested on charges of abuse of power involving torture and sexual assault against inmates. Loshagin testified as a witness in this case. He admitted that he saw Zinatulin and his 5 assistants torturing inmates and committing sexual assault against them, and also stated that he was forced to pay money to the head of the prison for 2 years, in exchange for not becoming a victim of abuse himself.
There, you probably can't even take a shit alone. No, you can't just sit in peace. No. It's just a total mess.
Loshagin's statement caused a public outcry once again. A new inspection was organized in the colony. Loshagin himself was transferred to another correctional facility to serve his sentence. During his imprisonment, Loshagin repeatedly filed petitions for parole and requested to have his imprisonment replaced with a restriction of freedom. But even if one court made a decision in his favor, another court would immediately overturn it. Finally, in mid-2022, Loshagin got lucky. His petition for parole was granted, and this time the court found the appeals court's arguments insufficient. On August 23, 2022, Dmitry Loshagin was released. Almost immediately, he started working as a photographer again. He got clients, and journalists started reaching out to him as well. Loshagin still denies his guilt in his wife's death and says he intends to simply move on with his life. He calls his time in prison a creative business trip. And what do you think about this case? Is Loshagin guilty or not? By the way, I'll post his interview on the Telegram channel and you can take a look at this person, see what he looks like, how he talks, and maybe draw your own subjective conclusions as well. Well, anyway, leave your comments, like or dislike, and check out other videos on the channel. They're right there in the end screens on your display right now, and new ones come out even if you don't always get notified about them, so make sure to subscribe and hit the bell.